So I've arrived back from my 2 weeks in Beirut, Lebanon. It was certainly an emotional experience to see a country that has given me so much and has a special place in my heart to be descending further into crisis day by day with an outlook that remains very dire. I first went to Lebanon back in 2003 when I was 23 years old and travelled all around the country. I was there with a Maronite Christian group, young uni students affiliated with that group. We actually drove to Syria, to Damascus for the day and visited some churches there. We went to a village where people still spoke Aramaic, or the language of Jesus. And then my wife and I came back as adults, first in 2015 and then in 2017 with my son Christian when he was 9 months old at the time. And when we were first there in 2015, we made some incredibly cool friends with these very flamboyant Beirut personalities we spent a lot of time with at the beach resorts and then heading out into the many bohemian bar areas, small bar areas, and the kind of lavish or salubrious nightclubs in Lebanon. First time I'd been back since 2017, and it was really to go and see what is life there on the ground in Lebanon's status now as a failed state and a failed system. What you'll see is some of the day-to-day consequences of that, a currency crisis, a black market in the exchange rate. You'll see an interview I have with a leading political figure, his discussion around things like Lebanon's loss of sovereignty, his perceived opportunity for a future economic model, and you'll also see some incredible acts of kindness. Some incredible people that I met, some incredible people that I got to spend time with. It was very hard for me to come back and forget a number of the very sad situations and people and families that I got to know through spending time with several NGOs and also Father Sammy. The duty to kindness and to community and to helping others that these people have is something I don't think I'll ever be able to forget. You'll also see, as part of that, just the humanitarian, dire living standards that people are in, including now the country which is about a third populated by Syrian refugees. Towards the end, what I do want to show you is just that the Lebanese people, that spirit is still there. You know, in someone's spirit, their class, their dignity, their charisma. I mean, you can't buy that. You know, this comes from knowing your why and your experiences in life. That's still very much there. And as part of that, you'll see that I did go out on a Saturday night just to see what the nightclubs and how that scene still was, and it's very much still kind of pumping. But as I do come back and reflect, and I'm afraid it does very much feel like a Venezuela-style failed state. The government that needs to do the reforms needed to get the bailout doesn't seem forthcoming to do so. And I'm afraid there doesn't seem to be a way forward. The country's living virtually entirely under the poverty line, with the Lebanese diaspora sending as much money as they can, but it's a very, 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 very sad situation. So I've just arrived in Beirut, Lebanon last night, had a few hours sleep, and I'm down here in Zatina Bay, which is a beautiful area not too far from the downtown section of Beirut, where there's a lot of quite salubrious yachts, most of which are probably owned by a lot of these kind of oligarchs that run the government here. But just thought I'd capture quickly some of the beautiful backdrop here, which is probably not what a lot of people think about when they have the picture of Lebanon or Beirut, Lebanon in mind, but beautiful spot.
The important thing, if you were walking around in Beirut, was not to be in the line of fire from the Holiday Inn.
So I'm just here at quite an iconic spot in Beirut, Lebanon. So if you can see in the background there, that hotel, which is completely missile and bullet ridden, is the Holiday Inn. Now that was famously built in 1971 to 1974. And was fully operational for just 1 year before the Lebanese Civil War, which we know ran from 1975 to 1989 or 1990. Now, this became a hotspot in the battle in the Civil War for about a year, and then 10 years later it also became another hotspot again. And we've got some beautiful luxury hotels here just next door, and that kind of iconic building, if you like, which is covered with missile launcher holes through it and just riddled and derelict, has been left here ever since. I believe there's a dispute from a Kuwaiti company and some local property developers about what to do with it, but obviously been there for decades since the Civil War, and quite iconic in terms of showing that long-lasting devastation of what that civil conflict would have looked like. Quite incredible. So just wanted to show these beautiful French-looking buildings here in the downtown Beirut area. Now, a couple of things. You may be able to see a common theme in Beirut, Lebanon, is there are these just beautiful structures that are often just partially finished. Half the city's still kind of being renovated. But we know, in terms of the history of Lebanon, it was given to the French, like Syria was, after the Ottomans were defeated in World War I. And as part of that, there's a very big French element, culture to both the architecture, and about 20% of the population still speak French, and actually is a primary dialect. So a lot of really beautiful traditional French architecture here, as well as some newer style, more modern French-looking buildings that Rafik Hariri, who was a prime minister, he was sadly assassinated, but after the Civil War rebuilt the downtown area and funded that with beautiful new French architecture. I just wanted to capture what I think is a really special scene in the back here. So you've got in the middle of downtown Beirut, which is just an absolutely salubrious and beautiful place, some Roman ruins. So you can just really get an appreciation for the culture and the history in this amazing country. So we can see here in the downtown area, unfortunately, a lot of the stores here are closed, and again that's just a sign of essentially what is a great depression of the Lebanese people. So very sad to see in this beautiful downtown area. We're just near the Parliament building down there, that it is now much of a ghost town, and as I said, a lot of the shops here are just not in existence anymore. I wanted to set the scene as close as I could to the origins of the crisis in Lebanon, really being a result of the decades of successive corruption and mismanagement within the political system. So here I'm in the downtown area of Beirut, and I'm just around the corner of the Parliament building. It might look to you like it's a ghost town. The reason that is that entire block is surrounded by military. I managed to get in, capture some of my thoughts before I was ultimately asked to leave by the military several times. Hi everyone, it's Nick Schoenmaker here, and I'm in downtown Beirut, Lebanon. So essentially, Lebanon has been in a financial and an economic crisis since about October 2019. Since then, depositors have not had free access to their money in their banking accounts. So at the moment, we're all focused as investors or multi-asset portfolio managers on things that are happening in the United States, in Europe with Credit Suisse and UBS, and the contagion risks, potential risks around runs on banks. But I'm afraid in Lebanon, we have much more dire situations. Both the government or the sovereign and the banking sector are bankrupt. People now are resorting to violence to make withdrawals. So depositors are going into banks with assault rifles and Molotov cocktails just to try and get some of their money out. It's an absolute disaster. The government here, and I'm right near the political building, which I'll go down to in a second, is delaying the country's progress needed to get an IMF bailout. So the IMF has offered to give a $3 billion bailout if a lot of the nepotistic and sectarian structures in the political system here are reformed, if there's more governance around institutions. But I'm afraid ever since the Civil War, what we've had in terms of the political structure in Lebanon is this sectarian system where the elites within the different religious factions, whether it's Maronite Christian having to be the president, the Sunni Muslim having to be the Prime Minister, or the Shia Muslims having to be a member of Parliament, essentially getting their favourites recycled through the political system. So we have a sectarian structure where people are voting for their religious favourites, but not what's best for the country. And these elites now have essentially taken over the state. It's a mafia-style government in its most horrendous form. I was in a prison yesterday with a priest, Father Sammy, who gave me a fantastic opportunity to meet and sit in the prison while he delivered a mass, and I spoke to a number of these people who were in jail. One man was in there for writing a fraudulent cheque for $1,000, whereas we have the political elites here that have bankrupted the country while they transferred $15 billion of their own money out of Lebanon. The world needs to help Lebanon. We have a beautiful, resilient, high-spirited population of people here. It's just awe-inspiring me for me to be here, which is why I continually am called back to this beautiful part of the world. I've had the pleasure of dealing with an NGO, doing some volunteer work, and I'll be doing more of that. I've met some amazing and incredible people, and it's really just an inspiring place to be. So essentially for over 3 decades, we've had mismanagement, corruption, and a government that has been spending much more than they were earning. We really don't have a robust economy in Lebanon, despite the fact that we have these beautiful buildings, just signs of extreme wealth down at Zatina Bay on the beautiful Mediterranean Sea where I'm staying. Signs of extreme wealth. But hello.
My friend.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, I asked him up there.
Oh.
I'm a bit flustered because I've just been stopped by military all around the place. So I'm just in the shopping district here now. So over the past 3 years, Lebanon's been in a multi-pronged crisis, economic, financial and humanitarian. If you think about what unfolded in October 2019, we used to have the currency pegged $1 to 1,500 Lebanese pounds. If I go to the black market exchange rate, and I'll touch on that later, what does the black market exchange rate mean? It is $1 for 100,000 Lebanese pounds. So the currency is essentially worthless. Most people here working in Lebanon are still earning a salary in Lebanese lira. There are a few fortunate people working in global companies. As one example, they get paid in US dollars, and if they do, they are the new 1%ers of the population, outside of the political elite politicians that are really the underlying cause of the crisis here. If you think about the confluence of events that have transpired, it's horrendous. And I can imagine being a local Lebanese person, feeling almost like I've been cursed. On top of that, you had the first ever sovereign debt default of Lebanon. So Lebanon's been issuing US dollar sovereign bonds to fund its twin deficits, current account and fiscal deficits for many, many years. That has ballooned, where the government has been spending more than it earns. Lebanon really doesn't have much of an economy outside of tourism. It used to be the Dubai, the banker of the Middle East, and it was thriving for many, many years. But that's no longer the case, I'm afraid. So we had the financial crisis here begin in the banking system in October 2019. We had COVID, we had the sovereign debt default in March 2019, and then we had the Beirut Port blast, which was horrendous. It's the biggest non-nuclear blast, I believe, that we've ever seen. And I actually visited someone's house yesterday with a priest who was living right near the port. And I've got some photos and things and videos that I'll share later, where their homes were essentially wiped out. We were there delivering a food box to these people. It's heartbreaking stuff, absolutely heartbreaking stuff. And again, the contrast and in Lebanon with these beautiful buildings here in downtown Beirut, this kind of salubrious New York style feeling with the French influence. In terms of the way forward here, so at the moment we don't have a government. We've got a banking system where depositors can't get their money out of the banks. They're going in with assault rifles, just not to rob the places, just to make a withdrawal because their mother has cancer, something horrendous has happened and they need their money. The other thing that's really just brings to home how corrupt the system is that the politician, these political elites, as I mentioned, that transferred $15 billion of their own money out of the country before the banking system collapsed, themselves own 50% of the banks. So you can see what we're dealing with here. In terms of Parliament, so I mentioned, the sectorial system sees seats reserved for the political elites within these families that are ex-warlords from the Civil War, Christians, Sunni and Shia Muslims, all of them. And there was actually a movement in Lebanon, a revolution, I think at the end of 2019, where the slogan was, all of you, as in all of you get out, all of you step down, all of you are part of the problem, every one of them. If we don't get this IMF bailout, so the IMF has offered to give a $3 billion bailout. If we look at countries like Sri Lanka, and I was talking to Mark Baker, an old colleague of mine from Aberdeen, in the emerging market debt team, about a week ago, and he was giving me some insights into, say, Sri Lanka, who were bankrupt not too long ago. But what they did is that their political class went through the reforms needed to get an IMF bailout. So there's light at the end of the tunnel, there's a way forward. They increased taxes, they broadened the tax base. They reduced subsidies on things that are very akin to or fitting for what's going on here, electricity or energy subsidies. They cut spending. Here, when we have the elite ruling class mafia running the government, and I was hoping to get right outside their headquarters to discuss this, also benefit from the crisis, because these power generator companies that step in to fill the electricity void, which is only provided by the state for 1 or 2 hours a day, they benefit from it. So it's just this layers and layers of corruption, and it's just heartbreaking for the beautiful, high-spirited, proud Lebanese people. It's hard to see a way forward, and the reference is starting to be made of Lebanon becoming, a failed state in its truest form, like a Venezuela, where they have a debt default and it's never repaid. If we don't get the government reforms needed to establish credible institutions, to reduce the nepotistic structures that we have here, that's what we're looking at. So the time clock is absolutely ticking for massive change. And these political elites that have caused the problems, obviously, as I've been alluding to and mentioned in many ways, are not forthcoming in that regard. So at the elections that we saw, the last elections, there was a big move for independent candidates to come in and kind of help solve the problem, and that's absolutely what's needed. What can we do to get Lebanon out of this current situation? So stop the bleeding economy, we need debt restructures, we need to separate the good banks from the bad banks. Unfortunately, the politicians here, instead of taking a haircut themselves, so these elites aren't experiencing or incurring any of the economic pain that the regular people are, they're introducing a system where there are different exchange rates. So if you are to take your money out of a US dollar deposit in the banking system, it's $1,600 per month you take out now, and an exchange rate of $1 for 15,000 Lebanese lira. So you can't get your money out in dollars, there's no FX reserves. You can get lira, but as I said before, if I go now to the black market exchange rate, which means me going into my hotel where I'm staying, or me talking to someone on the street, I get $1 100,000 Lebanese lira. But if people are trying to take their money out of the bank, their US dollar holdings, because there's no FX reserves, the haircut is being passed on to the customers. Again, it is just this horrendous situation. So that needs to change. We need to have one exchange rate. We need government reforms. We need to see the political elites feel some of the pain. Limit spending to essential services and not bribes within the government, absolutely. And we need to create more of a long-term economy in Lebanon that's producing goods. Increases tourism, to increase tourism we need more electricity to begin with, the very, very basics, and more governance.
Lebanon used to have a renowned banking sector that could attract foreign money, and in fact prior to the civil war it was known to be the banker of the Middle East, akin to Dubai's standing today. Lebanon also had banking secrecy like in Switzerland, which made it a favoured destination. However, the Lebanese civil war that began in the 1970s devastated the local lira, and as a result of the increasing trend of FX depreciation, the exchange rate was officially pegged to the US dollar in 1997 at 1,500 lira per $1. The central bank maintained this peg until late 2019, when it unofficially allowed the currency to become free floating after the accumulation of tens of billions of dollars in losses. The result was a complete collapse of the banking system, where account holders have been unable to freely access their savings ever since. Lebanon's banks for years now have stopped customers withdrawing money because the country does not have enough FX reserves, and the banks fear their customers may transfer the money to foreign institutions. This is all while the rich and powerful political elites transferred circa $15 billion of their own money out of the country. The people feel the banks have robbed them. As the banks are seen as not being held accountable, desperate depositors have resorted to holding up the banks, commonly with assault rifles and Molotov cocktails, in a heartbreaking attempt to simply access just part of their life savings. Army training for bank heists is now being conducted as the government understandably expects repeated incidents.
In terms of Lebanon's currency crisis, certainly that was exacerbated throughout 2022, given the US dollar strength. We know that US dollar strength in 2022 impacted every currency in the world, and it did lead many of us in the investment community to warn that emerging markets were facing a 1980s-style Latin American sovereign debt crisis. I spoke to Mark Baker, my old colleague, before I left to Lebanon, and we had a good chat about how the unique situation in Lebanon is a result of the currency peg and how that peg could be maintained by attracting offshore investors into US dollar deposits in Lebanon via those ludicrously high interest rates that we mentioned was really a result of the central bank underwriting that Ponzi scheme. But what happened when this Ponzi scheme, broke down is that the global community lost confidence in Lebanon and its banking sector, and the country could no longer attract US dollar deposits at any interest rate. So critically or crucially, what this meant was that there was just not enough US dollars in the economy to maintain the pegged FX rate. And what happens in these situations when there is not enough US dollars in the formal system is that a parallel market or a black market exchange rate opens up. So when there are extreme shortages of US dollars, as Lebanon is certainly a case in point, that parallel or black market exchange rate declines materially. If we look at that, or Lebanon as a case in point, it initially, the black market rate started at 20,000 lira per $1, but when I was in Lebanon, it was as low as 140,000 lira per $1. Having been back for several weeks now, I believe it's about 150,000. So basically, the shortage of US dollars has led to a currency devaluation crisis, which is particularly troublesome for Lebanon, given it doesn't really export anything to the rest of the world. So there's no fresh dollars coming in from trade. Initially, the central bank was running down their FX reserves to produce a sufficient amount of US dollars into the system, but they're now left with about 10 billion US dollars in FX reserves and about US 10 billion in gold. But even though we're at this critical juncture in Lebanon's crisis, the constitution does not allow for those reserves to be sold. So essentially, there are no dollars left in the system, and the Lebanese lira has gone into freefall. So I just wanted to give you an indication of the issues in the currency market here. There's multiple exchange rates, one that's set by the central bank and also then what's on the black market. So just to give you an indication of how much 100 US dollars converts to, it is 10 million local Lebanese lira. So you can see the impact of the currency depreciation, I'm afraid.
So in late October 2019, there was the revolution movement in Beirut, Lebanon, which essentially was a series of civil protests in Lebanon that began after the Lebanese cabinet announced a number of austerity measures on the 17th of October 2019. So the national protests were triggered by that. There were planned taxes on things like gasoline, tobacco, and calls on applications like WhatsApp to be taxed as well. And that quickly expanded into a countrywide condemnation of the sectarian rule, the stagnation of the economy, the sky-high unemployment rate, and the endemic corruption in the public sector. It certainly seems like it was a revolution for the people. The whole country, the first time in a very long time, seemed to be united in their protest against the government. I believe the protesters sang the national anthem and were chanting "thieves" throughout the demonstrations. So they certainly gathered together, the people of Lebanon, in what seemed to be an unprecedented rejection of the sectarian identities of the country. Lebanon's government has been divided along these strict religious or sectarian lines for 3/4 of a century, essentially, and the protesters were now finally calling for that government to step down. And if you look through the history of Lebanon, the last time they had protests of that size was actually all the way back in 2005 after Rafik Hariri, who was the Prime Minister at the time, had recently just resigned, and then he was assassinated in a truck bombing that killed himself and also 21 other people. There was a movement called the Cedar Revolution as a result of that called for the withdrawal of Syrian forces, which had been occupying the country for about 3 decades. So that was the last time we saw these types of crowds in Lebanon protesting.
A large amount of ammonium nitrate stored at the port of Beirut exploded, causing at least 218 deaths, 7,000 injuries, as well as US $15 billion in property damage, as well as leaving an estimated 300,000 people homeless. A cargo of 2,750 tonnes of the substance, which is equivalent to around 1.1 kilotons of TNT, had been stored in a warehouse without proper safety measures for the previous 6 years after having been confiscated by the Lebanese authorities from an abandoned ship. The explosion was preceded by a fire in that same warehouse. The blast was so powerful that it physically shook the whole country of Lebanon. It was felt in Turkey, Syria, Palestine, Jordan and Israel, as well as parts of Europe, and was actually heard in Cyprus, more than 240 kilometres away. It was detected by the United States Geological Survey as a seismic event of magnitude 3.3 and is considered one of the most powerful accidental, artificial, non-nuclear explosions in history. The Lebanese government declared a 2-week state of emergency in response to the disaster. In its aftermath, protests erupted across Lebanon against the government for their failure to prevent the disaster, joining a larger series of protests which had been taking place across the country since 2019. On the 10th of August 2020, Prime Minister Hassan Diab and the Lebanese cabinet resigned. To this day, no one has been held responsible for the incident. What you'll see here is an incredibly moving day that I spent with Father Sammy visiting victims of the port blast. You can see the port in the background here from the veranda of a home I'm in. And as we flick through, the resident there showed me via her mobile phone the devastating damage that was incurred because of the broader economic, financial and humanitarian crisis that has engulfed Lebanon. These people have already been through so much. Their money is stuck in the bank. Their currency is worthless. Their home has been destroyed from the Beirut Port blast. A few other snaps here from when, on a separate day, I spent some time just getting a bit more up close and personal with that port area, jogging past horrific scenes of devastation, and the fact that no one to this day has been held accountable is just horrendous.
What started as an orderly demonstration, however, turned into a small brawl with supporters of the Change MPs who have been leading a stance in defence of democracy and the rule of law, being blocked by those who had infiltrated the protest to silence and disrupt the peaceful protest.
Another really amazing contact that I'm grateful that I got to make during my trip to Lebanon was with Daisy Gideon. So Daisy's a award-winning journalist, humanitarian, a filmmaker, activist and an entrepreneur. One of the motivations for me to come to Lebanon was actually watching Daisy's film, which is called Enough, Lebanon's Darkest Hour. It's a really powerful and personal journey behind the mask of lies and deception that underpin the crisis in Lebanon. I'd recommend everyone watch her film. Really identifies both the nature of the current crisis and also explains how the only way out is for the Lebanese citizens to harness their own democratic right and power to vote for politicians that really do represent and believe in the Lebanon that they deeply desire to have. And so Daisy's now actually living in Lebanon. She's an Australian Lebanese journalist, but is now currently living in Lebanon with the objective to be the source of the most independent and objective news and information on Lebanon in the world. And given the dire humanitarian crisis there, her relentless focus at the moment is really on helping the Lebanese people overcome the catastrophic socio-economic and political crisis that they're facing. And she's very, very passionate about opening the eyes, enlightening the minds, and just liberating the souls of people, not by simply just seeing what is, but by believing in what could be. A very brave woman and fantastic at what she does. So there was a couple of events that I attended with Daisy. The first was a stance outside the Lebanese Parliament building, which was something that Daisy was involved in putting together to demonstrate respect for the Constitution and fight for democracy in Lebanon. The second thing that I attended with Daisy was a protest or a gathering following a call to action by several Change MPs to demonstrate the worsening conditions and the presidential power vacuum in Lebanon that are the cause of the daily worsening in conditions.
It was definitely one of the highlights of my trip to Lebanon to meet with Mr. Michel Moawad and have the privilege to get 20 minutes of his time to discuss really critical topics around the future of Lebanon, the economic, political, humanitarian state of affairs, his ideas on a way forward. Mr. Moawad was a 2022 presidential candidate. He's also the founder and president of the independence movement. His late father was the 9th president of Lebanon. Rene Marblewood was put into power in Lebanon to really bring an end to the civil war. Unfortunately, he was assassinated after being in power only for 18 days. Hi everyone, so it's Nick Schoenmaker here. Really have the pleasure today to be with Michel Moawad, which is quite special for me personally. Our family, Simon, in Australia actually is part of the Marblewood family, so it's an amazing moment to be here with you, so thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, I was just wondering if you could speak about your father a bit. My grandmother was your father's cousin and used to talk to him with a very high regard. So he was I believe, the 9th president of Lebanon, was in power for...
I need to count them. But...
Close enough, in power for only 18 days, which is an amazingly short period of time, and unfortunately, may he rest in peace, he was assassinated in 1989. Can you just talk a bit about what kind of man he was, what his values were, leadership ethics, and how you take inspiration, if you do, from him?
Well, my father was a man of duty and a man of peace. He really believed that Lebanon could not be ruled unless having a strong, sovereign, modern state that would ensure social justice for all the Lebanese.
Yes.
So he was a Shahabi in reference to President Fuad Shahab, who was president in Lebanon in the beginning of the 1960s, and whose movement was the only movement today that has tried to build a strong sovereign state.
Right.
He was elected president in 1989, just after the Taif agreement. He was, first of all, an MP ever since late 50s, re-elected constantly.
Yeah.
Then during the Civil War, there were no more elections. He was several times minister,
yes.
and he was elected president in 1989, just at the end of the Civil War, to reunite the Lebanese around the Taif agreements that have put an end to the war and put the basis of our new constitution. Unfortunately, he embodied those agreements on the one hand to reunite the Lebanese, but to reunite them around a sovereign and strong state. And one of his main duties, because part of the Taif agreement was the recovery of Lebanon's sovereignty towards the foreign armies that were there, the Israelis and the Syrians, and pushing the militias to give back their arms to the Lebanese government. That probably is what killed him, because he said no to Syrian occupation to Lebanon.
And in many ways you're trying to do the same thing here with having certain militias not have access to arms. But
well, at the end, you cannot build a state if that state has to share its monopoly of power and monopoly of strategic decisions with any private party, were it a foreign foreign state or were it an internal militia.
Okay. So Deputy Marblewood, so you're a Member of Parliament, you're the President of the Independence Movement, you were a presidential candidate in 2022. What are your aspirations for Lebanon, and what are you trying to do now to help this country recover from the worst economic and humanitarian crisis in its history?
Well, as you said, the Lebanese people today are living in hell. The Lebanese have lost their money. The Lebanese depositors do not have access to their money. The Lebanese state is completely falling apart. Just to put it in figures, the state or the public budget of Lebanon in 2018 was of almost around $18 billion. We're now less than 500 million in 4 years, from 18 billion to less than 500. So that you can understand what that does mean in terms of state services, in terms of education. Today we have more than 350,000 children outside school, because there's no public education, because teachers are not having, people don't have access to medication, people don't have access to food. According to the World Bank, more than 80% of the Lebanese are under the line of poverty. People are leaving.
Including medical staff as well.
For all the bad reasons, because they have no jobs, they can't sustain So people are really living hell. That country that was known for its health sector, its education, its building of a middle class, all that has totally collapsed.
Yeah.
Again, why are we there? It's not an economic crisis. It's a political and governance crisis that has led to economic and financial collapse. What has happened is that throughout the years, Lebanon has lost its sovereignty towards Hezbollah, that is an armed militia that is in control today of the main structures of the Lebanese state. That has pushed Lebanon to be part of the Iran axis in the region, and of course Lebanon's economy is built on its diaspora, that is present in the Arab world and all over from Australia to the US, and putting Lebanon to face that Arab world and the international community has played a very big role in the collapse that we are living. Lebanon, so we have a sovereignty problem, but at the same time we have a governance problem. The whole or a big chunk of the big parties and of the political class has transformed the state into how I would say, into
mafia-style sectarian structure.
Sectarian mafia-style structure, where corruption is widespread. I mean, everywhere, in the judicial system, in government, in the administration, and of course in the central bank, in the financial sector, everywhere. So that problem of on the one hand of sovereignty and the problem of governance, where constitution nobody is abiding by the constitution, and transformed Lebanon into a loya jirga led by confessional or sectarian mafias, has over time led us to an economic and financial collapse that we are living. Why am I saying this? Because some people are trying to just limit the problem to the results, to the effects, which is the financial and economic collapse. But the causes are fundamentally political and financial corruption and the problem of sovereignty. And as long as we don't say what are the real causes and trying just to find a solution to the effects, you will not find a solution to the effect. It's like if somebody has a cancer and that cancer has effects by having problems with his heart and with his arms and with trying just to solve the effects without saying it's a cancer, will not get you to any solution. So my candidacy is a candidacy that is trying to put to be a candidacy saying what are the real effects or what are the real causes of where we are, and trying to unite back the Lebanese around a clear program, a clear state, and a comprehensive solution, because I believe that there is no solution if it's not a comprehensive solution.
Absolutely. And just with it seems like one of what's absolutely needed to get the country out of bankruptcy essentially is there's an offer for an IMF bailout, but the IMF bailout is conditional upon a number of reforms, which, as you say, these mafia-style politicians who have caused the problem aren't going to be forthcoming in that regard. I mean, if we don't get that, then I worry this ends up like a Venezuela-style failed state. So we don't have a precedent now. We're already there.
And Venezuela had the opportunity of being the first proven reserve of oil in the world. And despite that, had a total collapse. We, a few years back, the Lebanese pound was worth, for the dollar was worth 1,500 Lebanese pound, where
140,000.
I don't know. I didn't get the figure because
yesterday was 140,000.
It's changing by the day. And so yes, we need to understand that we are very close to a total collapse, to become a failed state. And that's why that has to start by a president that on the one hand will bring back sovereignty to the country, will solve the strategic issues such as border control, such as border delimitation. You know that in the last few years, more than 20 billion dollars were smuggled across the Lebanese borders, and that is part of what has made after that public sector reforms, electricity reforms, tax reforms. So you need a president to solve those issues. You need a president to bring everybody back to our constitution, to build an independent judiciary. We didn't talk about it, but you know, all the world knows that Lebanon has had one of the biggest explosions in the history of humanity, the third biggest bomb after the nuclear bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And despite this, 3.5, almost 4 years later, there's no one responsible that has been arrested, and the truth is still not known to the families of the victims. We had more than 240
visited some
people killed. We had more than 6,000 injured, and more than 300,000 people that were left with their homes or shops destroyed.
So you resigned from parliament?
I resigned from parliament just after that. True. And that's why we need an independent judiciary, we need accountability, we need transparency, and we need a new economic model built, of course, on free economy, but also built on social justice.
Just one thing I was...
And yes, the door to that is an IMF deal. But IMF deal that is built on reforms and accountability, not an IMF deal as the one presented by the government, actually that is doing almost nothing, that is built on just cleaning the balance sheet of the central bank by erasing people's deposits, and that for us is totally unacceptable.
Just part of the problem here with the currency is that we've got no new fresh dollars coming into the country essentially, and the FX reserves from the government are largely run down. Because Lebanon, I mean, imports 80% of its goods here, it doesn't really export anything, so you really need foreign capital. I mean, what could be done to have a thriving economy here where you're exporting things to the rest of the world?
Well, that's a very good question. You are right. Lebanon imports almost everything, and that's why I have talked about a new economic model based on more productivity. Apart from my political status as an MP, I'm also the executive director of the Michel Moawad Foundation, which is a development NGO and humanitarian NGO that works a lot with international donor agencies like the UN agencies, USAID, the German GIZ, the French AFD, the Dutch, and others. Why am I opening this subject? Because we have developed, one of the things we have developed and proven to be right is an agricultural export project to the European Union. And we started that with the support of the Dutch, the Netherlands government, and today, in less than 5 years, we have 3,000 farmers exporting their products to the European market. So if an NGO is capable of doing that, that means that the state definitely should have. Yes, we need, unfortunately, apart from our constant problem of sovereignty with external or militia interferences, apart from our governance problem within the public sector, one of the problems that has led to this collapse is our economic model that was too much built on consumption and not enough built on production. And all that was financed by the central bank
Yeah.
through indebtment of dollars,
Yeah.
and all that collapsed by at the same time. So yes, we need to rebuild Lebanon's new economy, and we have all the potential. First of all, we have an incredible diaspora. That diaspora, without our diaspora, we could not have, today we would not have only been impoverished, we would have been really hungry. So that diaspora, just again in terms of figures, is sending to the country more than $7 billion a year. We're talking of our GDP is today around 16 to 17 billion dollars. That diaspora also accounts for more than 80% of what we call tourism. Tourism is mainly the diaspora coming back home, and that's another $5 billion. $5 billion. So that diaspora is today the main lifeline of Lebanon. But they're sending their money for humanitarian and social reasons. What we need is bring back the confidence so that diaspora reinvests in the country. And there are many sectors, productive sectors. I've talked about agriculture. Why not talking about IT and AI? And you know, Lebanese are very good all over the world at that. Our universities, despite all the collapse, still are very well known, and the Lebanese engineers. So we can sell our services, bringing back. We can build small industries, and all that is ready, and investment can come. But that means proper governance, that means stability, and that means above all bringing back trust in the system. And again, accountability and a modern state is essential for that, and the independence of the judiciary is essential, because not only to enhance accountability, but also to bring trust. If I'm an investor and I don't have a judiciary, I will not come and invest in the country.
Absolutely. And so if you said you're going to America shortly?
Yes, we have some actually events for the Moawad Foundation.
Oh, okay. So, you know, if the international community, I don't know how aware, there's so much going on in the world with China, the US, Russia, Ukraine. The world is at war, essentially, preparing for war. So I don't know how much attention Lebanon gets. Let's hope not. If there are people in the international community that can help Lebanon, given how many regional players, Iran, Saudi, France, US are involved in everything here, how does the international community help Lebanon if they can?
Well, first of all, we need Lebanon back under the umbrella of the Arab world and the international community. And for that, we need the implementation of UN resolution, specifically UN resolution 1559 and 1701, that are linked to the monopoly of arms under the state, and that are linked to border control and border delimitation. So those are essential. The other issue that is very much linked, and where we need the help of the international community, is with the presence of more than 1 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon. And that needs to be addressed. We cannot continue. Those refugees are there since 2013. You know that we consider, of course, that we have a humanitarian obligation, but that cannot continue by Lebanon bearing that problem, and by not dealing with the problem, because some of those refugees are coming and going to Syria freely, and still have a refugee status, because nobody wants to deal logically with that problem. So yes, we need to bear our part of the responsibility, but also the world needs to bear that part, and we need to quickly find a solution, and a solution that can come by chunks. It's not white or black. And so there's another responsibility of the international community. And of course, I believe that Lebanon cannot get out of the collapse and failure we are in without the support of the international community. Without the support of the international community. And that comes through an IMF program. And that comes definitely also through the diaspora. But for the international community to be able to help, we also need to help ourselves. And that is why we need a new leadership to this country. And that's why we're fighting to have a new sovereigntist, reformist president that will bring back the confidence or the trust to the Lebanese institutions, that would reunite the Lebanese. But reuniting the Lebanese does not mean being weak and grey. We need to reunite them around a clear program and a clear roadmap for salvation.
Well, Deputy Moawad, thank you so much for meeting with me today, and it's my pleasure to meet you personally as well. And
thank you for coming to Lebanon. Thank you for being
thank you.
a Lebanon advocate
Thank you
all
very
over
much.
the world and in Australia. And of course, I would like to finish by saluting the Lebanese Australian.
There's a lot there.
That is very close to my heart. And we're counting always on them. First of all, to be good Australian citizens, and second, to keep their faith in their home country in Lebanon.
So will the banking mega deal avoid a full-blown financial crisis? Former investment banker Mike Mangan expects more contagion, especially if the US Fed raises rates this week.
One of the things that's driving this, and I'm not sure central bankers are really on top of this, but every time they raise interest rates, they ratchet up the pressure on the banks. And there'll be, not all banks, but there'll be some banks on the periphery that'll be exposed. And so we've had 3 that have fallen over in the last 10 days. 2 because of unrealised losses on their US bond portfolio, and CS because there's just been a general lack of confidence because they've had a few foul-ups in execution. But I suspect that if the US raises interest rates on, I think it's Wednesday, you're going to see more pain and a few shrieks.
If you go back to 1998 and the Asian financial crisis, when dollar funding dried up for countries like South Korea or Thailand or Malaysia or Indonesia, countries that had been running very large current account deficits. The good doctors from the International Monetary Fund and the US Treasury came out to Asia, and I was around at the time, and every single president, finance minister, prime minister, central bank governor in every Asian country wanted to print money in response to the Asian crisis. And the IMF said, no, 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 you can't do that, because if you do, you're going to end up like Zimbabwe, and you don't want to do that, do you? And so they didn't print money. And so in late 98 in Asia, you had banks going bust, you had companies going under, you had recession, you had unemployment going up, you had real economic, financial, and political pain. But it was cathartic because economies slowed down, current account deficits disappeared, they swung back into surplus, and the green shoots of recovery came through, and eventually central banks were able to start cutting rates again, and we were off to the races again a couple of years later.
Today I've got 2 investment veterans with me. We've both had very big impacts on my career. So Mike Mangan, my uncle, is one of the people that very much inspired me to come into the investment industry. And Don Amstad. Oh, well, it's absolutely true, and thank you. And Don Amstad is a prior manager of mine who had an incredibly positive impact on my career and kind of still mentors me from a career perspective to this day. So thank you both. Just in terms of background, so Mike Mangan has spent the last 30 years really at the cutting edge of finance. He's had a successful career in funds management and stockbroking. In his prime, he was rated amongst the top 3 stock analysts in Australia. Before joining finance, he was actually in the military intelligence. He was an analyst in the military and also an officer at the 2nd Cavalry Regiment. Mike also spent time as a platoon commander in one of Australia's most decorated fighting units. Mike's also worked as a journalist and a media commentator and has been a regular guest speaker on a number of business TV programs. Mike is also the author of a fantastic book called Against the Wind, which is a really interesting story. Essentially, it is the story of Australia and how its character has developed. And we've also got Don Amstad here today. Don's just recently returned to the UK after several decades working in financial markets in Asia. Don, for many years, worked on a fixed income or a bond desk in Asia, I believe including during the 97 Asian currency crisis, before moving into funds management also in Asia, where he ran a large team of investment specialists across virtually every asset class: emerging market debt and equity, multi-asset, fixed income. And Don is very well known as a media spokesperson who's particularly well known for his expertise on all things China and known globally as a thought leader on China. So, Mike and Don, thank you very much for joining me today. As you know, I've recently returned from several weeks in Lebanon on my own. I was hoping to reflect today, I guess, what a failed state looks like and to chat to both of you about whether this could happen elsewhere, whether it's in emerging markets, the developed world, and just kind of discuss the backdrop in light of what is a very kind of tumultuous geopolitical and economic environment. So with that in mind, Don, look, thank you for joining me today. You've been involved in emerging markets for a really big part of your career as a bond investor or a bond dealer, also as an observer across equities and your expertise on China. With whatever understanding you have of Lebanon, I mean, how would you compare what you've heard to other emerging markets? And, you know, are there parallels or lessons from the Asian currency crisis? And do you see these kind of vulnerabilities being, I guess, broad-based?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Nick, for that kind introduction. And I would just like to congratulate you not only for getting into Lebanon, but also for getting out.
Oh, yes. There was some concerns. I can tell you about that later. Yeah.
I'm sure your dear wife and children gave you an extra big hug when you got home to Sydney Airport. So
yes.
Quite the holiday.
Absolutely.
To go there. So very, very brave of you, and
thank you,
and well done to you for doing that.
Thank you very much.
I mean, you make so many interesting points. It must be fascinating to go and see what it's like to try and live in a failed state.
Yeah.
You mentioned some of the sources of the problems there, and obviously one of them was the shortage of dollars. And I mean, I lived and worked through the Asian financial crisis back in the 1990s, where Asia essentially ran out of dollars as well. And this was countries like South Korea, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia. They were all running enormous current account deficits. And the global financial system basically stopped supplying them with dollars, which was an incredible shock to all those countries and sent their economies into an absolute tailspin. Now, what is very interesting is that these Asian countries managed to pull out of that tailspin. They took the medicine from the International Monetary Fund, even though it was very, very bitter tasting. Companies and banks did go bankrupt. As I say, the economies went into recession, but out of those recessions came the green shoots of recovery. And we all now see Asia as an economic powerhouse. And I guess that's because these countries had the political systems, to be able to take the medicine and follow through on these IMF-led reforms. And Asia is where it is today. And I guess one contrast between Lebanon and many countries in Asia is just the relative strength of the political system. And as I think you've already mentioned and observed, the Lebanese political system is just hopelessly fragmented. And from what I think you were saying, Nick, the political elites in Lebanon are actually benefiting and making money out of the crisis. Is that right?
So in a couple of ways, and I just should also credit Mark Baker, an old colleague of ours who's an expert on Lebanon, and some insights he gave me. But a couple of ways. So I think I think the politicians themselves own about 50% of the equity in the commercial banks. So there's all kinds of conflicts there when the commercial banks were essentially an extension of the central bank at one time, trying to increase the US dollar deposits from locals and the diaspora Lebanese people to then deposit that with the central bank to reduce the dollar funding issues and maintain the peg. The other thing then, so there's all these vested interests. The other thing, just as one example, would be the state provides 1 hour of electricity a day, and any power outside of that has to be paid for through private generators. The political elites and their family/friends own those private generators, for example. So you could say that they actually benefit in some ways from the crisis. So it's horrendous.
Yeah. I think the other point that came across that you made is just who is backing the different political parties there, and obviously as you mentioned, you've got one political bloc in Lebanon backed by the Saudis, and then obviously you've got another bloc backed by the Iranians, and obviously those two have had their differences. One interesting development, and maybe this is something for Mike to comment on, though, of course, is that there does seem to be a détente breaking out between Tehran and Riyadh at the moment, brokered by the Chinese.
Yes.
That is a very new dynamic in the region. There's, of course, previously the main political and military power has been the United States. It seems that the United States' interests are moving specifically to Asia and to China, and to the extent that the United States, because it now produces so much of its own energy, is less dependent on energy imports from the Middle East, is less interested. But obviously China is still very dependent on imports of energy. So China seems to be moving in, but maybe there's a different dynamic there, and I wonder if that might help the political dynamic in Lebanon, to the extent that it is a proxy battleground for the battle between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Absolutely, that's true. China's very much become that global diplomat more and more increasingly. So
one country whose debt we did not underwrite was for the Republic of Lebanon, and it was very much the French investment banks who were the lead managers for the sovereign's dollar bond issues. And whenever Lebanon did a dollar bond issue, we would always scratching our heads and wondering, well, who the hell's buying this? Because none of our big institutional investors would ever touch the bonds. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, the big buyers of these bonds were the Lebanese banks themselves, and as we found out later, also the central bank, which is a sort of Ponzi scheme. And of course, what was happening was that a lot of Lebanese citizens had US dollars to invest. And when you went into a bank in Beirut, you could have both an account in Lebanese lira, but you could also have an account in US dollars. And of course, the bank deposit rates that they paid on dollar bonds were relatively high, and the way they were doing that, offering these high deposit rates to investors, was because they were buying Lebanese sovereign bonds and literally sort of paying the coupons as interest. Now that works very well until the depositors try and take their money out of the financial system, which means that the Lebanese banks then had to sell these sovereign Lebanon bonds into the open markets. And the problem they faced was whereas they were very keen to buy Lebanese dollar bonds and pay essentially invest at a lower than market level of interest or spread to US Treasuries. Of course, when they came to sell, the marginal bid price was way below where they had these bonds marked on their books. So when the dollars started moving out, then the price of these Lebanese dollar bonds started moving very fast, because international investors wanted a massive premium for investing in such an extraordinary economy. And this turmoil in the Lebanese banking system, and this is where maybe it's a nice segue into Mike and his expertise on the US banking system. Of course, there were investors, including at our former employer, Nick, who used to buy shares in Lebanese banks because they said, well, 70% of their assets are in sovereign bonds. That's supposedly risk-free. And it's not risk-free if it's a mispriced sovereign asset that they're buying. And of course, the problem we've had with some American banks recently is that they've been led by this sort of Federal Reserve promise of eternally low interest rates to take duration risk. And of course, what we've seen recently is that inflation has erupted onto the world stage, including in the United States, forcing central banks to raise interest rates. And of course, when interest rates go up, bond prices, we all know, go down. And of course, some of the regional banks in the United States have probably had rather too much duration risk. So even though they've been invested in AAA risk-free treasuries, if it's a 10-year treasury or a 30-year treasury, well, that has price volatility too. And Mike, maybe that's a segue into you and your analysis on of the US banking system.
Well, the scenario that Don was talking about is pretty much Silicon Valley Bank, where they bought the so-called safest asset in the world and in US treasuries, and they had them in the vault. Except they had to go and sell them because the depositors were taking their money out, and I can talk about that in a minute. And when they sold them, they realised huge losses, which wiped out their equity, and that accentuated the panic. But what's driving this is higher interest rates. And this is really interesting because at the moment, banks in the US banks are only offering interest rates of sort of around 0.5, maybe 1%. But money market funds are offering sort of 4 to 5%. So it makes sense if you're a depositor to take your money out of the bank and put it into a money market fund. And so as long as you've got that differential, you've got this money flow coming from the banks and going to money market funds. And so, the banks are geared 10 to 1. So for every dollar of shareholder funds, they've borrowed $10, mostly from depositors. And as the depositors are dragging their money out, the banks, that's on the liability side. On the asset side, the banks have got to sell stuff. And Silicon Valley sold the treasuries, but they've got to look for assets to sell. So the other problem is that the assets that they're selling are not just US treasuries, but they're also, particularly the smaller banks, they're loaded up with commercial real estate. And commercial real estate is also falling in value because of higher interest rates and work from home, which is what we're doing right now. So that's causing values of one of their main, it's not their asset, it's their collateral, but it's causing values of collateral to fall. So that's jeopardizing their solvency. All in all, you put those three factors together, better rates at their competitors, leaking deposits and falling commercial real estate values, and you've got a real problem.
Yeah.
And what I find amusing is that Janet Yellen will tell you that their system is safe and resilient, and Jamie Dimon got up and said the same thing last week. And I think Jerome Powell got up and said we're safe and resilient. And 2 hours later, some of these US regional banks fell 50, 60% within 2 hours. So now they steadied the ship on Friday night. I think part of that is because there's talk of instituting a ban on short selling of banks, which is, I think they did the same thing in the GFC. I think they actually instituted bans on short selling.
It's like another Fed put.
Well, it works for a while, but if you've got depositors that are taking money out because they can get 5% somewhere else rather than 1% for the bank. Now, the banks could raise their rates from 1% to 5%, but I'm guessing that would destroy their net interest margin.
Yeah.
And destroy their whole reason for existence. So that's why they're.
And that's the difference is, Mike, because the banks there lend for 30 years, their assets aren't able to reprice like banks can here, where they borrow short-term, lend long-term, but the long-term lending is going to have a variable interest rate margin benefit.
Well, they've probably got a whole range of duration on their loan.
Yeah.
But the easiest asset to sell is their US Treasuries. It's much harder to sell a loan book, I would imagine. But a lot of those US Treasuries they bought when the interest rate, and it was like this for like 10 or 15 years, 0.1% or something like that. Now, as Don said, as interest rates have risen, the value of those bonds has fallen. That's what happened to Silicon Valley. Yeah. So it becomes a solvency issue. I mean, I get the impression that some of these senior bankers and Yellen, they still think it's a liquidity issue, which from memory that's what the narrative was during the early part of the GFC. It's not a solvency problem; it's a liquidity problem. So we just have to give them a bit of liquidity. But in fact, the GFC was a solvency problem, and it's a solvency problem here too if they maintain interest rates where they are. Yeah.
Just what you mentioned before, Mike, about the potential prohibition on short selling on banks. Do you think this kind of, if it's the right way to describe it, agency risk? Is it agency risk where the Fed, the Fed's got your back, has kind of supported whether it's retail flows into markets, but it just seems that there's this entitlement that investors have now, whether it's retail or even a lot of equity institutional investors themselves, that anytime there's a problem, the Fed in some shape or form will come in and has got your back. I mean, do you think that's a worry? I think you alluded to it before. It just creates bigger potential systemic risks in the financial system the more that practice.
Well, I think it's a short-term measure because what's happening is the share price has been driven down to zero.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to First Republic last weekend. The share price was driving down to zero. So they stepped in and they basically took over the bank and they sold it to JP Morgan. Yeah. So that's the first that's equity holders getting wiped out.
Yeah.
But it doesn't fix the problem that they've got with depositors taking their money, who's on the liability side of the book, taking their money out and giving it to mutual funds. Doesn't fix that problem. The only way they're going to fix that problem is if interest rates come down. And they don't seem to want to do that because they want to kill inflation.
Yeah.
We had very strong jobs numbers on Friday last night.
Yeah, non-farm payrolls. Yeah.
So it looks like they'll maintain interest rates there for a while.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a short-term finger in the dike sort of measure, and it worked. It worked Friday night, last night, but it's it may not last for very long.
So here you get to meet Father Sammy, an incredible fellow that I got to spend quite a bit of time with in Lebanon. I had pre-arranged to meet Father Sammy through a contact of mine here in Australia. What we did On our first day, we went for a drive to a prison where he knows the inmates quite intimately. He goes there on a regular basis, brings in some food, gives them some breakfast, a traditional Lebanese breakfast, and some nice sweets and things, and then he delivers a mass to the prisoners. They let me come into the jail and sit down inside the prison with the inmates. There was probably about, let's say 20 that sat and attended the mass. They were all very gentle, what appeared to be very gentle characters. They all got along really well, which was kind of not what I was expecting either. There was no sense of aggression. Next day spent with Father Sammy, he picked me up and took me to his school in Gideon, which is a beautiful Christian coastal town in the north of Lebanon. He's the headmaster of the school. We saw some kids in action in the schoolrooms, some kids performing. As well, we just saw a lot of it's a very beautiful school, but also just a lot of the repairs and maintenance that really need to be done. Father Sammy was saying that the donations that he's getting, are barely covering the teachers' salaries at the moment.
I'm here with Anastasia, who's one of the teachers here at the school, and we're just going to talk a little bit about how the economic, financial, humanitarian crisis in Lebanon has impacted teachers, students, the morale of the school, and just some of the acts of kindness that Father Sammy and the teachers here are also involved in. So, thanks Anastasia.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So, maybe if you just tell us a bit how life has changed over the last 4 years for yourself, the students, the community.
As you know, the financial crisis started in Lebanon in 2019,
yes.
way before the whole Ukrainian-Russian war has been affecting all countries around us.
Yes, it does,
the collapse has already started like 4 years ago. It was unexpected. We couldn't get our money out of the banks anymore. Everyone, poor or rich, were like equal in regards to the cash that they have. It was really unexpected. It was really hard. Like, you're living a decent, good life, you're content, and then suddenly you find that you can no longer satisfy your basic needs or fulfill your basic needs. It has affected each and every one of us. I think the same way, with a little bit of difference between the classes of the society. Some people still had cash at home. Some people sent their money abroad because they knew that this was coming.
Was there many that did that knew? Because I don't hear many stories of that, but was there? There were some?
It's all over. It's not for the regular people or the regular employee or the average Lebanese person or the middle class, which no longer exists.
No longer exists,
this is just a glimpse.
How would the kids manage to focus on the curriculum and the schoolwork and exams with such a dire outlook for their futures, their families' conditions now, their basic needs? I mean, how are the teachers working with the kids to provide focus and structure when there's so much chaos and hardship around?
I can tell you this. There's lack of motivation, to be totally honest, but there is a part where everyone is responsible, and each one of us needs to wake up in the morning to fulfill their duties. But if I tell you that people are motivated, students are motivated, teachers are motivated, no, they are not. There's nothing to motivate them. It's just their will to do it because they have a responsibility. So responsibility comes first. Motivation is just something else. Students, I can talk about my high school students. The first question, to what college can I apply when I finish high school? And this is a disaster because most of the students, and particularly in Europe, USA, Canada, Australia, they're accepting a big number of students, of foreign students. So it's easy to get a student visa. So we have all our youth traveling abroad to specialize abroad, and we're losing that. Now about the curriculum, we have modified a lot. We work, I'm an on-campus coordinator. I work day by day with the teachers. We modify, we try to make certain changes so that students adapt.
Yeah.
We work a lot on the social emotional now, a lot more than we used to do before. So this whole curriculum shifted in a way, you know, just to answer to the needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of just some of the broader community work and acts of kindness that the community is involved in, what's that?
This is something that I'm very, very proud of being part of. Even though we have this situation going on, we still try to help others who are in much more need than ourselves. As for me, even for me as a single mom, that was very hard for me. At days I couldn't put bread on the table, and I had people to help me. I've asked for help, and this experience humbled me a lot. You know, I had to put my ego on the side.
Yeah.
I had to actually ask for food.
Yeah.
So this is really, really hard.
Yeah.
Like when you see me, you don't think that I'm someone
No,
in
you
need.
don't. No.
But still, we have our dignity, you know, Lebanese people. I mean, but the ego part of it, I have to crush it in some way. So anyways, with the acts of kindness, we're still trying to reach out to donors, to people. Even $1 would make a huge difference. If I found someone to help me put food on the table, I can find someone to help others. So I'm really involved in that. It means a lot to me. I look at the eyes of the moms who receive, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, food should be.
I know.
We shouldn't even be discussing food, you know.
Yeah.
No one should sleep hungry.
Yeah.
No child should sleep hungry.
No.
So yeah.
So basic food insecurity is rampant across the entire country and within previous middle class family homes and everything.
Definitely. We have lots of NGOs working with us. World Food Program, USAID helping a lot, the Norwegians. A lot of NGOs trying to help.
Yeah.
But I don't know how longer are they able to help, because the crisis now is hitting the world as a whole. Yeah.
What do people feel about the politicians here, their role in the crisis, the future for a better structured and governed political system here?
I think we've allowed this to happen. This is a heavily charged religious country.
Yeah.
And I think we've allowed this to happen ever since the 90s. I think now we've come to a realization that it shouldn't be so. It can't be so no longer. And how hopeful I am hopeful. Something will change. I mean, a situation cannot be the same for a long time. All throughout history, no situation has been ever the same, you know. Dictators crumbled and then they vanish, you know. So I'm really hoping that something is gonna happen really soon to make things change. But definitely, we want everyone out. We just want
everyone out, every single one.
Yeah,
that seems to be. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that. That was really,
thank you for listening,
really helpful, and all the very best. And it's really, as I said, just the pride and dignity that everyone carries themselves with amidst all this is just amazing. So thank you. I'm just preparing some food boxes today. These cost about $35 each, make a huge difference to the families here, which are absolutely suffering. So I've been here for a week documenting the world's worst humanitarian and economic financial crisis that the world is undergoing at the moment, and there's this amazing sense of community where people are really getting together and helping, and even just $1 apparently makes a big difference to people's lives here. So the situation really is dire, and we need all the help we can get here in Lebanon at the moment. So thanks for looking out, and we'll be taking some of these boxes around to the community today.
Father Sammy and I that afternoon went for a very big drive into the Bekaa Valley. We went literally down to the Syrian border. Then we kind of headed right a bit closer to the Israeli border into a Druze village. Druze a different religion, for some of you that may not have heard of that. And met this family, really lovely family. The husband, the father's a hardworking man, works 12 hours a day as a security guard, but given the currency crisis, like most people in Lebanon, being paid in lira, the equivalent monthly salary that this fellow's on is about $50 a month. Their money or their savings, whatever they had, is also stuck in the bank. So you can see here their house that we visited, which was really like a little shack on the back of another house, had no lights. It's in an area that would get really cold in the wintertime, horrendously cold. So there is this old fireplace in the middle of the living room here. No food in the fridge. As you can see, the kitchen's very makeshift. The bathroom didn't have running water, so they have to manually flush the toilet, I believe, by throwing buckets of water down. And we were there to deliver a food box. Father Sammy gave the fellow some money just to tie him over, be able to get the kids in public transport to school, which is often just an insurmountable task to do. And then we headed back, but that was quite a moving day on a number of fronts.
Nazif was part of the Aflatoon NGO.
So Aflatoon is a 20-week program that we founded in Lebanon, or we founded the branch in Lebanon, and it aims to educate children ages 7, 8, 6, very young children, on important values and20, including financial literacy and social etiquette. And we bring every Saturday to campus 90 plus kids from 6 different schools around the city, and they're from different geographic, different religious backgrounds, and we work to put them together in an environment where they can learn, where they're not afraid to make mistakes, and where we can start breaking the cycles of some of the toxic patterns that have been established in Lebanon, and we hope for a better future through Aflatoon.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
And we'll put a link to some information as well for anyone that might want to help or learn more about Aflatoon. We'll have some information inserted.
So you'll see here an incredible collection of experiences and new friendships I made with the involvement that I had in the introduction to the NGO Aflatoon. Zaina, an incredible person who's kind of spearheading the work with that group, is just an incredible human being. And again, someone who's really dedicated and put their heart and soul into trying to create a better future for, in this case, kids from a diverse, religious, underprivileged parts of Lebanon. So I'm with Zaina here from this fantastic NGO Aflatoon that I've been doing, getting a lot of insights into their work and their passion for the Lebanese community, the helping of the kids, bringing different religious sects together to break down polarization. And I've just seen some really heart-moving and amazing things. So we'll have some links at the end for people that are looking to help, and I just wanted Zaina to talk a little bit about the organisation, what they're trying to achieve and what's happening in Lebanon here and how that's complicating an already tough situation in this country.
Well, honestly, this polarization is not new to Lebanon. Unfortunately, it has always been there in the backdrop. Nobody really talks about it or tries to do something about it. And especially rampant in the underprivileged communities.
Yes.
Once you are in a secluded environment, it's very easy to develop wrong assumptions about the other. And the other becomes some alien monster. Right? So it is very important for us to reach out to these kids and make them understand that they belong to a bigger entity and a whole big world, and that we are all now being governed by universal ethics and universal human rights, and that they have worth. And they can have dreams, and if they work hard, they will achieve these dreams, and they can have a good life by doing it themselves. They do not need to rely on somebody else. So these concepts that fall all under active citizenship, you know, we were looking for a curriculum that could facilitate our mission in, you know, giving these kids these concepts and in a fun and interactive way, because you know, if you tell the child what is right and what is wrong, that is not how you reach them. You need to, you know, really talk their language. So started my research, and luckily I found Aflatoon. It is an NGO in the Netherlands. They have like an open source curriculum for all ages. They start from the age of 3 until, you know, high school, and they even have youth programs. But for our purposes and for our budget for the time being, we're like, we need to focus on the age that will give us the most, you know, effective results.
Yes.
So research shows that around the age of 7, this is when kids start developing their moral compass.
Yes. From my perspective, I've spent the last 2 Saturdays here with the little kids, and they're just a beautiful, enthusiastic, passionate group of young, hopefully future leaders. And you know, there's one particular group, you know, collection of little kids, but you know, one lady that just really caught my eye and caught my heart. It was a Syrian refugee. You said she'd had not just a Syrian refugee living in an underprivileged community, and I've seen their school as well, and their basic would be an understatement of the facilities they have. Also has had family die recently in the earthquakes in Syria, and the passion, the leadership I saw her taking in her class was just amazing. And I think, you know, if we can, the community can give people like that opportunities, it's people like that that at some point help change the world, and I hope that's what we can do.
بتحبوا أفلاطون؟ ليه بنحب أفلاطون؟ حبيبة قلبي ليه؟ أنت خلص عم بتردي كثير، ليه؟ ليه بنحب؟
Like that. Easy. You go with your squats like that.
يلا اعملوا مثله.
Like that. And you have to go. Good.
هيك فيكم تقووا عضلاتكم بدون ما تحملوا اثقال او بدون ما تروحوا على الجيم. لحالكم فيكم تعملوا هيدا الشيء. برافو يا شطار. ايه بدك انت كمان تساوي؟
Okay, can you feel blood in the muscle, see? That's the blood in the muscle, see? Okay, the other one, you know, push-ups. What we do with the hand like this, and that makes your chest look very good. So like this. Put hands like this.
هيدا كرمال يقوي عضلاتكم للبارت الجسم الفوقاني.
Put your hands like this. Yeah.
واو. شو مبين شو؟ يلا انت ابداي. يلا بدك تقوي جسمك. يلا بدنا نقوي جسمنا، العقل السليم في الجسم السليم.
So if you just did 2 exercises, this is called squat.
So هيدا اسمها سكوات.
Just 2 exercises, and that push up.
وهيديك اسمها بوش اب. برافو بيعلموكي بالمدرسة، يلا فرجينا.
You can reach up here.
لا ما توسخي ثيابك يا حياتي. اوه واو 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 واو. شو عم بيعمل نيك؟ شو عم بيقوي هلا؟ اي عضلات؟ عضلات الايد. برافو. من وين اجا نيك؟ من وين اجا نيك يزورنا؟ يا حياتي زهرة من استراليا. برافو يا شطار.
6
يا حياتي.
8 9 10 Good. Okay. Okay. Go. Push.
واو واو واو. شباب واو برافو. شوي بس ما توزع حالك. شوي بنشتغل على جسمنا لنقوى شوي.
أنا بدي.
Okay.
شو بيقول المثل؟ العقل السليم.
I'll show you one more.
في الجسم السليم.
So you're back like this. This way.
واو 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 شفتوا عضلاته شو كبار. يلا غنوا له أفلاطون. أفلاطون أتى من بعيد سائح يبحث عن عالم جديد. أفلاطون أتى من بعيد سائح يبحث عن عالم جديد. واو شو انت ايديك شكلهم ضعاف بيوجعوك شوي بتصير عمول بس وحده او اثنين وكل يوم تعمل بالبيت كمان. هيدول فينا نعملهم بالبيت لحالنا صح؟ افلاطونرز فينا نعملهم هيدول بالبيت لحالنا؟
بس انا بعملهم كل يوم.
برافو.
Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Oh my God! You won!
So I'm just here in the in a very underprivileged suburb of Beirut. I'm here with the Aflatun NGO today. Zaina, the lady I'm with, is up giving a lesson to the kids. But what we're going to try and do for the school is I'm going to go to a paint shop after this with Zaina. I'm going to buy some paint and we're going to come here just as a start to improve the surroundings of the educational environment here. We're going to get some paint and Zaina and I are going to paint a very big wall here over the next few days. So I'll update you on that. Okay, so I'm here today with Dr. Lena Dada, who's founded a fantastic NGO all the way back in 1995. So they've been working to fight poverty for 26, 28 kind of odd years. Female leadership, it seems, mostly female leadership, doing a lot in making sure that people are not going hungry, helping with education and healthcare as well, some of those kind of three really important things. So obviously I'm here in Lebanon for the 2 weeks looking at the economic, political and humanitarian crisis and just sort of interesting just to see how your work has been impacted over that time.
Let's start with to divide the 28 years before 2019 and after 2019 because there's a big difference. I established Gideon, as you said, in 1995 with friends that are still working with me till now, and we are now 132 volunteers ladies are working on a daily basis. That's why we are mostly a ladies NGO. To tell you the truth, we didn't feel how much the situation is bad before 2019. We worked as a satisfaction to support maybe Lebanon, to support the people, but we didn't feel how much the people are in need before 2019. After 2019, the situation is completely different. We faced a big problem. Really, people. We can see people now. They used to be donors. Now they are beneficiaries. Unfortunately. Education is really, we can see the difference. People that are parents that are very well educated, now they cannot afford to educate his children. This is very bad feeling, even for us. As a goal leader for SDG Zero Hunger, I feel really that I have a big responsibility, but we cannot be a replacement of the government, unfortunately. But this is what we do. We are helping people to eat, helping people to study, to education, helping people in health. The health is something really, it becomes a issue because before Ministry of Health tried to support some Lebanese people. Since 2019, even this it becomes responsibility of NGOs only. So our role now is to help urgent cases, operations, people that need operations, people, cancer patients, and chronic old patients. We support them with all medicines for free. So we are working in all fields.
Yeah, wow, that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing all that. We were just talking a minute ago about how unusual it is in Lebanon where state employees are getting paid in lira. And I mentioned, I went for a drive the other day and saw these military soldiers waiting to hitchhike, so that, people that work for the state. Can you make any comments on that? Just different people you're seeing, and maybe that was some of the ones that used to previously be donors, but how people working for the state, which just seems unfathomable for any other place in the world, are now living materially below the poverty line.
Yeah. The situation become more and more bad because every spend in Lebanon become in dollar now to match the crisis, inflation that is on daily basis. On the other hand, as you said, and as I told you before, salaries stay in Lebanese lira. So people take their salary for let's say $20 or $30 now per month, and they are spending. They have to spend $300 or $400. This is the big issue that no one can solve it.
With the different levels of different types of socio-economic groups that you deal with, do people actually understand the root causes of the problems here, the problems of the banking sector stuff that's happened with central banks, politics, or do they just feel like they're a nation of cursed people? Like, do they understand what's caused a lot of the problems here, or it's just unfathomable for people?
For me, I believe that all people are lost, and they feel that they are really unfair what happened to the Lebanese people, and nobody care about them. I mean about the government or the people in charge of decision making. So this is the most bad point, that everyone feel it, that really
feels like a curse.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally see why. Just wondering, for you personally, you're a dentist. Is your husband a doctor?
Orthodontist.
Orthodont. How do you still do that work? How do you manage it all, both of you, when you're doing stuff?
We used to work since 40 years.
So
we are well organized. He's taking care of the management of the center, of our center, and I'm working only for my patients. And I organize my time between NGOs and after Corona, I gave more time to NGOs than my business, because I feel that I have to retire and to feel more satisfied with this kind of services for people.
Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing that, and we'll put some information to your work as well, so people can have a look. Thank you very much.
Distributing our daily iftar for Ramadan also. 70 beneficiaries per day. Hi, so, hello. So here is our social department. They usually works by files more than the medical department. But as I told you, we distribute like monthly payments, food boxes, schooling. We cover universities as well. We distribute meat portions and just.
Yeah. Wow, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
I go back to the days of PO18, which is the most iconic club in Lebanon, which is the club that actually brought electronic music to Lebanon, and this club has been around for more than 20 years.
Meeting my friend Nabil in Lebanon, given the current economic and financial collapse, was something I didn't know what to expect when I saw him. My wife Amy and I met Nabil back in 2015. We were staying at the Riviera Resort in Beirut, Lebanon, which is on the Corniche on the Mediterranean Sea, and that resort is quite renowned for its beach club parties that it has there. And we met Nabil as this just extremely flamboyant character who kind of spent every day at that resort hanging around. Meeting Nabil and seeing that, like everyone else in Lebanon, his money is stuck in the banking system. You know, obviously he's extremely sad. He's had to completely change everything about his life. I'm sure he's had to redefine himself to his very core. But that charisma and that character was still there. I really enjoyed hanging out with him, and you know, he's the kind of guy we could just sit there for hours with a coffee and just enjoy each other's company. Lebanon signed a staff level agreement with the International Monetary Fund nearly 1 year ago for a US $3 billion 4-year extended fund facility. However, the conditions to secure a full program, which is seen as crucial for Lebanon's recovery, have not been fully met as of yet. The IMF prior actions include measures such as a bank restructuring strategy, an audit of the central bank's foreign asset position, capital control, and deposit withdrawal law. I'm afraid the power vacuum and non-functioning government has meant all the major institutions needed to get the recovery underway are lacking the necessary power structures that are needed to get the recovery in play, and hence this power vacuum within the government is certainly compromising the delivery of the much-needed IMF rescue package. The IMF recently warned that Lebanon was in a very dangerous situation. A year after it committed to reforms it has failed to implement, and they said the government must stop borrowing from the central bank. Look, the lacklustre track record of policy inaction over recent years doesn't leave too much room for optimism. Now, is there hope for change? Now, certainly, if anything has left me with no uncertainty, the spirit, the pride, the respect, the dignity of the Lebanese people gives me much hope. The human spirit is a powerful, powerful thing, and that was on demonstration through all of my interactions in Lebanon. But is the country gone too far? Will it become the next Venezuela, or is it already? It's hard to say. We pray and we hope for change, but unless we see the government get their act together, it's hard to see light at the end of the tunnel. If you look at Sri Lanka, they had a terrible time. The government became bankrupt, but it's now past the worst of its crisis and is slowly getting better. If you refer to Sri Lanka, you can see they have the political class making the reforms that were stipulated by the IMF. Things like a boost to fiscal revenue by increasing taxes, a broadening of the tax base, and a reduction in wasteful spending in areas such as fuel and electricity subsidies, both of which are very fitting to the situation in Lebanon. So because the political class have been forthcoming in making the required reforms, there's a way forward with Sri Lanka. However, the difference with Lebanon is that the political class seem in many ways to actually benefit from this crisis, and hence there are many vested interests involved with Lebanon. As just one case in point, the powerful families in Lebanon own many of the electricity generators. And we know the electricity generation business is booming in Lebanon because the state only provides 1 hour of electricity a day. So imagine profiting from such a horrendous situation, and that is just one example. We know that the depositors have not had free access to their savings in their bank accounts since the end of 2019. The ruling elite in Lebanon own about 50% of the equity in the banks. So how do you solve one of the world's worst economic disasters? Certainly Lebanon will need to win back trust and confidence from the international community. This would involve a major governance overhaul so as to build better and more credible institutions. The Lebanese parliament must stop their blame game and act immediately on the various social, financials and governance reforms required to move forward. A complete overhaul and restructuring of the banking sector is needed in order to restore solvency. There needs to be a major government reform so as to increase the economic consequences to the powerful elites in order to avoid such failures ever occurring again. Fiscal prudence and debt sustainability must become the new status quo. Lebanon's economy needs to be reformed, as it fundamentally doesn't make money due to the lack of the production of any goods. And importantly, the urgent establishment of a government, a president, that is able to implement the necessary reforms to secure the IMF package is certainly crucial.